Greetings, YouTube. Today I want to talk about Doom Patrol, the television series. And there's a cat escaping. Um, and my wife and I have watched all four seasons over the past couple of years. I just recently was able to pick up seasons 3 and 4 on disc. We do not have the streaming channel that the show was actually carried on. So I've been watching these on disc. I think I got the first two seasons on DVD and I got the second two on Blu-ray because they were very, very affordable by the time I remembered to I need to order the third and fourth seasons for that. Um, and I went into Doom Patrol with a great deal of hesitation for a couple of reasons. One was the character of Jane, who at the end of the show is known as K, Kaleidoscope, and one for the character of Negative Man or Larry Trainer. Um, and I can remember reading Doom Patrol as a kid. Okay, and it was just this goofy collection of very superhero-like characters, classic 60s stuff I was looking at back then, and 60s and 70s stuff. And, you know, spandex costumes, the whole nine yards, and, Elastigirl and, that kind of stuff, and or Plaster, whatever she was called. Uh, Rita Farr, who was a was a shapeshifter who never really got control of her shapeshifting. Didn't never never really mastered that, um, which made me smile. Um, but I was nervous because of Jane and because of Larry. For in the case of Larry, I was nervous because in the series, unlike there was no depth in the old comics. They were just heroes and a team, and they did adventurous things. But there's depth for the characters. There's backstory for the characters. There's pathos for the characters. And I was really afraid that they were just going to have the character of Larry be the tragic gay person and maybe kill him off, you know, all your gays must die trope. Um, and if they didn't, it was still problematic because Larry Trainer is the negative man. He is covered in bandages from head to toe that he has to wear. Otherwise, he will irradiate everything and everyone around him and kill people. So his bandages protect the world from him. But that means he can never have any physical contact with anyone. And that's problematic if you have a neutered gay character. That's that's not a good look. Kind of like the way the character of Cyborg in the comics was always very much of a neutered black man. He was a safe black guy because he literally didn't have genitals. You know what I mean? It was not a good look. It was an ugly trope. Um, the cyborg of the Doom Patrol is a cyborg, but he was still a fully functional person. Um, just had some obvious cybernetics and a whole lot of internal stuff that you couldn't see. Um, so that was the character of Larry really made me nervous. I was very happy to see that they did a backstory for him where you get to see him actually expressing himself as a gay person, though it was a gay person in the 60s and in the military, so not something that you could be out and about with. You also get to see him in the modern era having a relationship in the dream time. And not just like dreaming about a relationship, but literally connecting with another real world human being while they both dreamed. So it was an actual emotional connection and they were having a relationship and in physical contact with each other, even though that contact was just taking place in a dream state, in a dream space rather. They were still real people really interacting with each other. So that was cool. And we got to see him in the last season where he began to pursue a romantic relationship for the first time in his negative man body, essentially. Even if he hadn't had been wrapped up, just being covered in burn scars from head to toe would make him less approachable by many people when it comes to partners. A lot of people are not going to want to date a person that is covered in burn scars head to toe. I'm not justifying their position. I'm just telling you that puts a lot of people off. Okay? So I was pleased to see that they handled Larry with respect. So I could tell they were moving in that direction even in the first season, so my that allayed my fears. And the second reason was Jane. Now, in the comics, she's known as Crazy Jane, and at some one point in the series, her code name was Crazy Jane. So it was a code name as opposed to a moniker someone had just given her. And code names are, Iceman, Goose, whatever, Joker, whatever the code names you have at hand that are either you choose for yourself or someone gives to you or they're assigned to you. So it was a little Crazy Janeism as a code name was a little bit more acceptable than just calling somebody crazy because that's very problematic. Calling somebody crazy is problematic, particularly because Jane suffers from identity uh, dissociative identity disorder, often referred to as multiple personality disorder in the past. And in this being a superhero world, she is the public face, the primary of the inner world that exists, and it's a literal world known as the underground, where all these other alters live, and many of the alters have powers, and Jane can channel them, and when she does, they actually step into the role. Jane's no longer in control. That person is in control for that time, for whatever time they're there, and they get to use their abilities. But for the most part, Jane is the primary, but she herself has no abilities. She's just an ordinary person trying to deal with the real world and the fact that she is there to help comfort the child that exists that suffered the trauma, and the child's name was Kay. And I don't I don't need to wax poetic about Kay's suffering. It was horrible. Okay, and I was very nervous about that because if you're going to use that as some kind of tasteless trope, that's again going to be a really bad look. So the fact that they gave it some depth and you revealed her past over time and you got to know the characters that were her alters and you got to see them interact with each other in the underground and come to grips with things, and you saw Jane repeatedly trying to do the best she could to protect Kay while also grappling with the fact that she's living in a superpowered world. Uh, it was it was well done, and I was very happy about that. And at the end of the series, you get to see Jane become integrated. And I have never suffered from DID, but as a person who suffered trauma, I did very much have a persona. My personality very much was viewed as separate time periods of my life. I was 7, 14, and 19, 21 rather. I don't know why I always divided myself up that way, but I did. And I eventually integrated that together through therapy. So that's an aspect of my trauma. It wasn't the same as Jane's trauma. Not making You can't compare pain, uh, but I understand to a certain degree what that kind of concept of integration is and how powerful it can be. Um, and when that happened, they didn't really. It happened very late in the series because once you do that, Kaleidoscope or K, that she's taken the actual name of the child was inside. She doesn't become integrated until she finally admits that all of this stuff didn't happen to just this child. All of this stuff happened to all of them. And when she was finally able to admit that she wasn't just some bystander to it, she wasn't just created after the fact, that she was the person that experienced these horrible things, that's when she was able to integrate, which is cool. And eventually, you got to see her have a real romantic relationship, though it was just at the end of the last episode that you really saw the connection. But you could tell that it was going to be a genuine connection and one that was going to give her the support and closure that she needed to become a fully functional person who has the full range of relationship options, and she wants them. Okay, so seeing that Jane was handled with respect also was really cool. It was cool to see Alan Tudyk as the bad guy in the first season. It was cool to see the character of Danny the Street, an actual street. The DC universe is weird, and I loved it for it. I've always viewed the DC universe as being the more magical of the two main comic universes that we, consume, and Marvel being the more scientific kind of universe. Of course, they both have science and fantasy in both ends of the spectrum. But I've always seen uh, DC as softer, a little bit more magical than scientific. And you see this in the show because there's lots of spell casting, there's lots of spiritualism, and there's lots of beings from other dimensions that are summoned and things like that. And you got to see all these characters with their full depth and realize that all of them can be assholes. And as personal growth is, some of that is coming to accept who you are and trying to do better for the people you love. And in the process, becoming better, which of course helps you. Um, you got to, and of course, there's Niles Calder, who is the person that puts this whole team together, and you find out that he was not a good person in many ways, even though he was driven to do what he did for a desire to protect his own child, who ended up also being incredibly, unbelievably powerful, um, which was a lot of fun to see that kind of power in the hands of someone that visibly looks like a 13-year-old, though she's not actually 13. Um, and I mean, like Rita Farr, the woman with the shape taking ability, who never got real control of it because she could have done so much with that, and she didn't because of for real, e- easily understood reasons. It was self doubt. It was her own issues in life. There's a reason she didn't become the very classic kind of superhero you saw. She was a very tragic character in many ways, but she was still great. Cyborg was fun. Finally accepting who he was. Uh, Robot Man, played by Brendan Fraser, beautifully done. Just showing so much pathos and so much depth, and all of it expressed through almost exclusively his voice. Because you do see him in his actual body in some episodes, but for the most part, he's just a walking. There's a guy in a fake metal suit, and Brendan Fraser is just the voice actor, and he's doing a beautiful job. One of the things that a little bugged me a little is that I think that the show did too many big stories. For me, the Doom Patrol should have been about the small stuff. It shouldn't have been about the Save the Universe stuff. Really shouldn't. Because they live in a world where there's the Justice League, Batman, Superman, Martian, the Martian Manhunter, the Green Lantern Corps. And yet they were grappling with real world Save the Universe problems, and those people never got involved. Doom Patrol really should have been calling them up and say, hey, we got this real problem here. It's kind of out of our weight class. Could you come give us a hand? And they would have shown up and saved the day because there were so many storylines that were, uh, earth-shattering, save the universe stuff that like a single member of the Justice League could have shown up and fixed. So I would have been happier if their stories had been a little smaller within that sphere of their power levels. For the most part, in the show, their power levels were not huge. They weren't heavy hitters. It was only in the later time of the series that you began to realize just how strong some of these folks were, and they never really got to show that off in the show. It was almost an after the fact kind of thing. You didn't realize that Kaleidoscope is as powerful as she is. I mean, she's hitting up there, in my opinion, with like Martian Manhunter now. She has this plethora of top-notch superpowers that she can now access whatever she wants to. Admittedly, only one at a time, but that's still a pretty damn good ability if you can use all kinds of different things. Just like the Martian Manhunter has an incredibly wide selection of abilities that he tends to only use one at a time, uh, particularly because some of his powers are like a sliding scale. He gets strong, he can, he can his densities, things like this. So sometimes it's he's doing this when it comes to his powers. Also, he has a crippling fear of fire, which is a big thing in our world because there's fire everywhere. So yeah, I really enjoyed the series, as my wife said, because we've watched quite a bit of superhero content over the years, and she said this is the show that had the most heart, and I'm absolutely with her on that. This show had heart, and I loved so many parts of it. It was just that I think that they should have done smaller scale stories. I really loved the humor. I really loved the character development because there were actual real world character arcs. You got to see people change and become more deep and more of who they are. You saw them heal. You saw them accept themselves. You saw them create the families that, and for the most part, none of them had anymore or never did have. And that's a beautiful thing. And that was a lot of fun to see. So I know I've waxed forever on this, but I loved watching the show, and I know I'm going to go back and look at the episodes that have commentary on them because I want to listen to that. Well, I have to go back and figure out which ones those are. I don't remember. And highly recommend it. If you have the streaming channel that, but I don't remember what it is now, that this is on, watch it. And if you don't, get your hands on a copy, or find some other means of watching it. I think it's really worth your time. It's a lot of fun, and again, the humor is good, the character development's good, uh, and I can overlook a lot of the flaws the show did have, just because so much else of it was great. And like my wife said, it's a show that really has heart.